The first time Jasper Rourke tried to write his name, his hand shook so badly that he snapped the chalk clean in half. And that was the moment Maria Garrison knew she was in the right place at the right time, even if everything else about Dusty Creek, Texas told her otherwise. The year was 1878, and the town of Dusty Creek sat crouched along a dry bend of the Pecos River like something the land had coughed up and forgotten about. It had two saloons, one church that doubled as a schoolhouse, a general store run by a suspicious-eyed man named Harlan Pope, a blacksmith who never smiled, and a post office that received mail perhaps once every 2 weeks if the writer didn't drink too heavily on the route from San Angelo. What Dusty Creek did not have, until Maria Garrison arrived on the afternoon stage in early October, was a proper schoolteacher. She stepped off that coach in a cloud of red dust, clutching a carpetbag in one hand and a wooden trunk that the driver tossed down without ceremony, and she stood in the middle of the main street and looked at the town that had agreed, through 3 letters exchanged over 6 weeks, to pay her $30 a month to educate its children. She was 24 years old, with dark brown hair pinned beneath a practical bonnet, and eyes the color of good river water, deep green and clear. She had come from Austin, where she had trained under a woman named Mrs. Caulfield, who believed that education was the single greatest force of liberation available to human beings, and Maria Garrison had carried that belief into her bones. The school was the church, which meant she had 5 days and 6 evenings a week to use the building, with Sundays reserved for Reverend Aldous Crane, who greeted her at the door of the whitewashed building with a firm handshake and an expression that suggested he wasn't entirely sure a woman ought to be teaching arithmetic. She thanked him pleasantly and proceeded to organize the desks. She had 12 students enrolled within the first week, ages ranging from 6 to 14, a mixture of ranch children, the store owner's daughter, the blacksmith's 2 boys, and one girl named Corrine, whose mother ran the laundry and whose father was absent in a manner nobody spoke about directly. Maria learned the names of all 12 children by the second morning, and she set immediately to the task of assessing what they knew and what they needed. It was on her 3rd day in Dusty Creek that she first encountered Jasper Rourke. He came in with the morning at his back, which is to say he appeared in the doorway of the church school just as Maria was writing the alphabet across the top of the chalkboard in her neat, even hand. The sunlight came from behind him and made him into something more silhouette than man for a moment, wide-shouldered and tall, hat in his hand, and she turned from the board and found herself looking at a man perhaps 26 or 27 years old with a jaw that looked like it had been roughed out of sandstone and dark eyes that held something cautious and watchful and not entirely comfortable with being seen. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, trail-worn and honest. The kind of man who had clearly spent more time on the back of a horse than under any roof. He had a scar along his left cheekbone that suggested a past with sharp things, and his hands, even at rest holding his hat, looked capable of considerable work. "The children's session starts at 8, Maria said, not unkindly. "I know it," he said. His voice was low, the kind that came from somewhere deep in the chest. "I'm not here for the children." She set down her chalk and turned to face him fully. "Then what can I do for you, Mr. Rourke?" he said. "Jasper Rourke. I work for the Double Bar Ranch out past the creek bend." He stopped. Something crossed his face, a kind of private war. He turned his hat once in his hands. "I heard you were teaching, not just children." Maria studied him. She had been told when she took the position that if any adults in town wished to attend evening lessons she was welcome to hold them. It had been framed as charity work mostly. Mrs. Caulfield had told her that in Western towns there were always men and women who had come up too hard and too poor to have received a proper education, and that teaching them was, if anything, the more important work. "I hold evening sessions on Tuesday and Thursday," she said. "Anyone is welcome." He nodded slowly, as though filing that information away with great care. He put his hat back on his head. "I'll come Thursday," he said, and then he was gone, back into the bright October morning, and Maria turned back to her chalkboard and tried to explain to herself why the room felt different after he left it. Thursday came. She had two other adults at her evening session. A woman named Bess Alderman, whose husband ran cattle 2 miles east, and who wanted to learn enough arithmetic to keep her own household accounts, and an older Mexican man named Eli Vargas, who spoke excellent Spanish and passable English, but wanted to read the English language newspapers that arrived sporadically from San Antonio. Jasper Rourke arrived at 7 in the evening, when the last of the light was going orange through the single glass window, and he sat at the desk she indicated without a word, and folded his hands on the surface and waited. She began where she always began with adults. She asked them what they already knew. Bess knew her letters and could read slowly. Eli could read some English words on sight but struggled with longer passages. Jasper said nothing at first, and she turned to him directly. "Mr. Rourke," she said, "what's your current level of reading and writing?" He kept his eyes on the desk surface. "None," he said. The word landed quietly but with weight. "None at all," she said, and she was careful to keep her voice entirely neutral because she had been trained to do that, and because she could see in the set of his shoulders that any note of pity would bring him straight out of that chair and back to the double-bar ranch. "I know numbers some," he said. "I can count cattle, count money. I can read a brand if I know it." He finally looked up and met her eyes, and what she saw in his was something fierce and private and deeply tired of itself. But letters, words, no. "All right," Maria said simply. She pulled her chair around so that she was sitting near the front rather than behind the desk, and she picked up a piece of chalk and drew a single letter on the small portable slate she used for individual work. "Then we start at the beginning." She held up the slate. On it was a large, clean capital J. "This is J," she said. "It's the first letter of your name." Something happened in Jasper Rourke's face then. Something that was very quick and very unguarded, and she chose not to examine it directly, the way you don't look straight at something you're not sure you're meant to see. He learned the J that Thursday evening. He sat in that desk for 2 full hours, and he traced it and he copied it and he asked her twice, without embarrassment, to show him again. And the second time she showed him, she held the slate close and said, "The curve goes this way, see, like a hook pointing left." And he nodded and tried again and got it right and said nothing, but the line of his shoulders changed almost imperceptibly. After Bess and Eli had gone home and the oil lamp on the desk was burning low, he still sat there with the chalk in his hand, and the letter J chalked on the small surface of the writing paper she had given him, repeated down the page in a line that went from uncertain to slightly less uncertain. "You did well tonight," Maria said, gathering her things. He looked up, and there was a wariness in him that she was beginning to understand was simply his natural state, a man who did not easily receive good things. "I'm 30 years behind on this," he said. 26 or 7, she said, "and it doesn't matter, knowledge doesn't expire." He stood, bringing the full height of him to the room again, and he picked up his hat. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Before here." "Austin," she said. "Before that, a small town near Fredericksburg. My father was a schoolteacher too." "Was," he said. "He died when I was 16, she said. "He taught me everything he knew first." Jasper turned his hat in his hands in that way she was already beginning to recognize. "That was a good thing he did," he said. "Yes," said Maria. "It was. He came back Tuesday. He came back Thursday. He came back the following Tuesday with the J mastered so completely that she moved him straight to the A, and she told him that she was going to teach him his own name first, all 5 letters of it, because it was the most useful thing a person could have and the most personally meaningful place to start." He looked at her when she said that, as though she had offered him something he had not known was available to him. The other students at the evening sessions came and went with varying regularity. Bess Alderman came faithfully twice a week and made excellent progress. Eli Vargas came when he could and was a pleasure to teach. A younger cowhand named Pete arrived twice and didn't return. A woman from the saloon named Ruby, who asked Maria to please not tell anyone, came 3 times and turned out to be a faster reader than almost anyone Maria had ever taught. Maria didn't tell anyone. Jasper Rourke came every single session without fail. November arrived and brought a cold that had teeth in it. The Pecos country in November could turn from warm to bitter in an afternoon, and Maria had taken a room at the home of a widow named Mrs. Paulson, who kept a clean house and decent food, and asked relatively few questions. Maria would walk the 4 blocks from Mrs. Paulson's house to the church school each morning before dawn, to light the stove so that the room was warm when the children arrived. One of those mornings, at the very first gray edge of dawn, she turned a corner and nearly walked straight into Jasper Rourke's chest. He stepped back and caught her arm to steady her, and they both stood for a moment collecting themselves in the cold air. "You're out early," she managed. "Heading back from night watch," he said. The Double Bar Ranch rotated its hands through night guard duty during cattle moving season, and the ranch was a 20-minute ride from town. He was still holding her elbow, and they both became aware of this at approximately the same moment, and he let go. "I was going to light the school stove," she said. "It's barely 5 in the morning," he said. "The children's hands won't hold chalk if the room's cold," she said. He looked at her in the gray light for a long moment, as though she were a phenomenon he was still working out the dimensions of. Then, without saying much else, he fell into step beside her. He lit the stove. She wasn't sure why she let him, except that he seemed to need to do something with his hands, and she understood that impulse. He was good at it, efficient and sure, and the fire caught quickly and spread warmth through the small room, and they both sat for a few minutes in the pew nearest the stove without any particular design to do so. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask," he said. "How is it that you never learned to read? Growing up, were there no schools?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was level but had something beneath it that she recognized as old pain that had been disciplined into flatness over a long time. "My mother died when I was 4, he said. "My father wasn't much for staying in one place. We followed cattle work from the time I was big enough to sit a horse. I was pulling my weight on a drive by the time I was 9. He paused. "There were no schools in any of the places we stopped, and when there were, we weren't there long enough." "And your father," she asked carefully, "died on a drive when I was 14. A steer rolled on him." He said it without drama. "After that, I was on my own." Maria was quiet for a moment, letting that settle in the way it deserved to. A boy of 14, alone, in a world that asked nothing gentle of the people who lived in it. "I'm sorry," she said. "Was a long time ago," he said, but he didn't tell her the sorry wasn't warranted, which told her something. "You've done well for yourself regardless," she said. "I'm a cowhand," he said, and there was no bitterness in it, just fact. "It's good work, it's all I know." "It won't be all you know after much longer," she said. He looked at her sideways, and something in his expression shifted just slightly toward something she might have called warm if she were being generous. "No," he said. "I suppose not." The children began arriving half an hour later, and Jasper left before the first of them came through the door, and Maria stood at her chalkboard and tried to concentrate entirely on the alphabet song. She was teaching the youngest children, and not on the way the cold morning light had fallen across his face when he said her name in her mind, which she realized she had been doing without deciding to. The nights grew colder and the sessions grew, if anything, more focused. Jasper worked at letters with a seriousness that she had rarely seen in a student. There was nothing casual about the way he approached the learning. He never came unprepared, never arrived without having practiced what she had assigned him. He kept a piece of flat wood he had sanded smooth, which he used as his practice board between sessions, and he brought it to show her each time with the careful pride of a man who understood he was late to something but was determined to make up the distance. By late November, he had learned his full name, all 5 letters, Jasper. He had practiced them separately and in combination, and on a Tuesday evening in the last week of November, when the wind was pushing hard against the church windows and the fire was crackling steadily in the corner stove, Maria set a clean sheet of paper in front of him and said, "Write your name." He looked at the paper for a moment. His jaw was set in that way she recognized as resolve dressed in stillness. Then he picked up the chalk pencil she had given him and he wrote, slowly and deliberately, each letter pulling through the motion in a line that wobbled slightly at the S but held together, all the way through to the R. Jasper. He set the chalk down and looked at what he had made. She did not say anything at first because she understood, in some place that had nothing to do with teaching methods, that this was a moment that belonged to him, that the 6 letters on the page represented something that no one who had always been able to write their name could quite understand from the outside. "That's your name," she said quietly. He turned and looked at her, and his dark eyes had something in them that she had not seen before, a softness that had come up from underneath everything else, and it made her chest feel strange and full in a way that she filed away for examination later, much later, when she was alone. "Yes," he said, "it is." He looked back at the paper once more. Then he folded it very carefully, the way you fold something you intend to keep, and he put it in the inside pocket of his coat, near his chest, and she pretended to be looking at Bess Alderman's arithmetic worksheet so that she wouldn't have to explain the expression she suspected was on her face. December came to Dusty Creek with a blue-cold sky and the smell of wood smoke from every chimney. The town settled into its winter routines. The children at the school were deep into their primers now, and Maria was genuinely proud of several of them, particularly Corinne, whose mother's laundry money had scraped together enough to buy the girl a proper reader, and who had turned out to possess a remarkable mind that absorbed everything and asked for more. Maria began to keep extra books for Corinne, lending them from her own small collection. The Double Bar Ranch slowed its work in winter, as all cattle operations did in the cold months, which meant Jasper had more time than usual between duties. He used the time to practice. She knew this because the quality of his work between sessions improved at a rate that told her he was putting in hours on his own, and when she mentioned it, he confirmed without any particular pride that he had been using his evenings. "What are you practicing on?" she asked. "That wooden board," he said, "and a piece of old leather I had, and the floorboards in the bunkhouse when the other hands were asleep." She thought about him lying on the bunkhouse floor in the dark, tracing letters into wood by the memory of firelight, and something pulled at her so strongly that she had to take a breath to settle it. "You could come in the evenings when there's no formal session," she said. "The church is open, there's always a lamp." He looked at her in that considering way he had. "Would that be all right, you being there alone with—" "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Rourke," she said simply. "I didn't mean that," he said. "I meant for your reputation. People in a town like this talk." She appreciated genuinely that he had thought of it in those terms rather than any other. "Let them talk," she said, with more ease than she quite felt, because she was not entirely indifferent to what people said, but she was more interested in what was right. "The church door will be open and visible from the street." He came 3 additional evenings that December, outside of the formal sessions. She taught. He learned. They talked in the spaces between practice, the way people do when they have established the beginning of trust and are curious about what lives behind it. She told him about Austin, about her training under Mrs. Caulfield, who had been a formidable, broad-shouldered woman with strong opinions about the rights of women and the obligations of educated people to the uneducated ones. About her reasons for coming west, which were partly the salary and partly the plain conviction that a place like Dusty Creek needed a teacher just as much, perhaps more, than Austin did, and that she wanted to go where she was needed. He told her gradually, in the way he did everything, which was carefully and without excess, about the cattle drives he had ridden from the time of his boyhood. About the land, which he described in terms that made her understand he loved it in the wordless, bone-deep way that people love the things they know entirely, not because it was beautiful but because it was honest. He told her about the Double Bar, which was owned by a man named Cal Hutchins who was demanding but fair, and about the men he worked beside, a rotating cast of characters whose names he recited with the easy familiarity of someone who has spent many hours in close quarters with people and has made peace with their specific peculiarities. She noticed, listening to him, that he never described himself as having a home. The bunkhouse was where he slept. The range was where he worked. But home, as a word with warmth in it, never appeared. Christmas in Dusty Creek was a modest affair. The church held a service, and there was a small gathering afterward with food contributed by various households. Maria attended with Mrs. Paulson and was introduced to what felt like the entire population of the surrounding area, including a number of ranch families who had ridden in for the occasion. She was shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries near the window when she looked across the room and found Jasper Rourke looking at her from across the gathering, with an expression she could not entirely decipher, except that it was not indifferent. She excused herself from the conversation she was in and made her way to him. He was standing near the wall in that particular way of his, present but not quite comfortable, a man accustomed to the outside of gatherings. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Rourke," she said. "Miss Garrison," he said. He held a glass of cider and had his hat under his arm. "Merry Christmas. You look as though you'd rather be outdoors," she said, because she had learned she could say direct things to him and he received them without offense. The corner of his mouth moved in what was, for him, a significant expression. "I'm all right," he said. "I have something for you," she said, and reached into the small bag she carried and withdrew a thin, cloth-bound book. "It's a primer. More advanced than what we've been using. You're ready for it." He took it from her with both hands, the way you take something you consider valuable, and he looked at the cover. She watched him read the title, letter by letter, his eyes moving across the words with that careful, deliberate motion that she found she now watched for the way you watch for something you have been looking forward to seeing. "I can read most of that," he said. "All of it," she said. "Try again." He did. His lips moved slightly over the words and then went still as they resolved. He looked up. "McGuffey's Second Eclectic Reader," he said, and the quiet astonishment in his voice at hearing his own words correctly, at having understood something written, was the most purely happy sound she had heard since arriving in Dusty Creek, and she found it was making her smile with her whole face in a way she generally tried to moderate. "That's exactly right," she said. He held the book and looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," he said, and the word had weight in it, the kind that comes from someone who does not use words carelessly. "You did the work," she said. "I just showed you the door." "You did more than that," he said, and something in the directness of it, the simple, honest quality of it, reached her somewhere precise and certain, and she looked away toward the gathering because she needed a moment's cover. January arrived with a storm that blew for 3 days and left Dusty Creek under 6 inches of snow, which was unusual for the Pecos country but not unheard of. The school was closed for those 3 days, and Maria stayed at Mrs. Paulson's and used the time to write letters to Mrs. Caulfield in Austin and to prepare new lesson materials for both the children and her adult students. She found herself sitting at Mrs. Paulson's kitchen table with a lamp and her papers, thinking about Jasper more than was strictly professional. She examined this with the same directness she applied to everything else. She had known him for approximately 3 months. He was, in her careful assessment, a man of considerable integrity, a certain quiet honesty, and a depth that he kept under wraps the way the Pecos country kept its water, mostly underground. But it was there and it was real. She respected his mind, which was genuinely sharp beneath its lack of formal training. She was drawn to the stillness in him, the way he occupied space without needing to fill it with noise. She concluded at approximately 10 o'clock on the second snowbound evening, developing feelings for him that were not at all pedagogical in nature. She set her pen down and looked at the wall for a moment. Then she picked the pen back up, because she was a practical woman, and there was nothing to be done with that conclusion except to continue doing exactly what she was doing, which was the right thing, which was teaching him, which was what she was here for. The snow melted and the sessions resumed, and Jasper came to the first Tuesday session with a page of his own writing that he had produced during the snowstorm, working in the bunkhouse by firelight, and he set it in front of her without preamble. She looked at it. It was a full paragraph, copied from the first page of the McGuffey's reader she had given him, in his handwriting that was now recognizable and clear, with only 2 letters formed slightly wrong, a lowercase g that had lost its tail and an h that leaned too far right. She looked up from the page. He was watching her read it in that still, guarded way, waiting. "Jasper," she said, and she realized she had used his first name for the first time without any preceding title, and they both noticed it. She did not take it back. "This is remarkable progress." Something moved across his face, quick and genuine, and unguarded in a way she had only seen once before, when he had written his name for the first time. "There's mistakes," he said. "There are mistakes," she corrected automatically, and then recognized she had done the grammar correction without thinking and started to apologize, but he was already showing the edge of that not-quite smile. "There are mistakes," he said, trying it her way. "Fewer each time," she said. "And the sentences are structured correctly. You understood what you were copying. You weren't just tracing shapes." "No," he said. "I was reading it." He said that the way someone says something they still find slightly astonishing, and she found it entirely wonderful. February in Dusty Creek brought 2 things of note. The first was a circuit court judge who rode through and settled 3 land disputes that had been simmering for a year and a half, which removed a significant amount of background tension from the town in general. The second thing was that Cal Hutchins, the owner of the Double Bar Ranch, rode into town on a Thursday afternoon and into the church school at the end of the afternoon children's session with a complaint. Maria was erasing the chalkboard when he came in. He was a big man, red-faced, with the particular manner of someone who was accustomed to being listened to immediately and without argument. He took off his hat, which she gave him credit for, and said that his best cowhand was spending too many evenings in town and that he needed the man's head to be on his cattle work. She turned from the board and looked at him pleasantly. "Are you speaking about Mr. Rourke?" she said. "I am," said Hutchins. "He's a good man and a good worker, and I got no complaint against him personally, but a man who's spending his evenings at a schoolhouse is a man who's got his mind elsewhere, and I can't have that come spring drive." "With respect, Mr. Hutchins," Maria said, "your employee is becoming literate. In my experience, a man who can read a contract and write his own name is considerably more useful to an employer, not less. He'll be able to read your branding records, your purchase agreements, your correspondence." Hutchins blinked. This was apparently not the angle he had anticipated. He turned his hat in his hands, and she noticed with private amusement that this was a mannerism she had come to associate with a different man entirely. "He's a cowhand," Hutchins said, "not a bookkeeper. He's a person," she said, still pleasantly, "with the right to better himself in any legal and decent manner available to him. I would hope, as his employer, you'd see that as an asset." Hutchins looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're not what I expected when they told me a schoolteacher was coming." "I rarely am," she said. He left without pressing the point further, and Maria said nothing to Jasper about the visit. She saw no reason to. Hutchins did not come again, and Jasper continued coming to sessions without interference. It was in the middle of February, on a Tuesday evening when Bess had a sick child and Eli's back was troubling him and Ruby had a busy night at the saloon, that Jasper came alone to the session, and they sat for 2 hours in the warm lamplight of the little church school, and she taught him the difference between common nouns and proper nouns, which he picked up with a speed that delighted her. And then they drifted, as they sometimes did when the formal instruction was finished, into simple conversation. He had been reading the McGuffey's reader on his own, and had moved through it more than halfway. He had questions, specific ones, about words that puzzled him, and she answered them one by one, and there was a pleasure in this that she recognized as rare, the pleasure of a student who was not just learning to satisfy requirement but because the thing itself had taken hold of him. "What do you want to do with it?" she asked at one point. "With reading and writing once you have it fully." He thought about it for a while. Outside, the February wind ran along the church eaves. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about land." She waited. "A man I worked with 2 years ago on a drive up to Kansas," he said. "He had his own spread, small but his. He'd saved for 7 years. And I've been saving too, but a man who can't read a deed or write a letter can't do much with savings. He has to trust other people to handle everything for him." He paused. "I don't like having to trust other people with things that are mine." "That's a very sound reason to learn," she said. "It's the reason I came through your door," he said. He looked at her directly then with those dark, careful eyes. "But it's not the only reason I've kept coming." The sentence arrived simply, and she felt it simply, which is to say it arrived in her chest and stayed there. "I know," she said, equally simply. He looked at the surface of the desk between them. He was not a man who made declarations easily. She had understood that from the beginning. What he offered with care, and what he withheld because he was weighing it with the same seriousness he applied to everything else. "I don't have anything to offer a woman like you," he said. "I live in a bunkhouse and I work cattle, and I'm just now learning the alphabet at 27 years old." "I wasn't aware anyone asked you to make an accounting of yourself," she said. He looked up. There was something uncertain in him, which was not an expression she had seen before and which she found she wanted very much to answer. "I'm just saying what's true," he said. "Then let me also say what's true," she said. She was careful and she was direct, and she held his eyes with hers. "I have not met a man whose company I value more than yours. Not in Dusty Creek and not in Austin and not anywhere I've been before. That is simply a fact, and I'm not in the habit of pretending otherwise when facts present themselves." The silence in the room was not empty. It was the kind of silence that has substance. "Maria," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name without any preceding form of address, and it was, coming from him, at once very quiet and very large. "Jasper," she said back with the same simplicity. He reached across the desk, slowly and without any suddenness, and covered her hand with his, and his hand was large and rough-palmed from years of rope and leather, and warm, and she turned her hand over and held his, and they sat like that in the lamplight for a moment that was its own complete thing, unattached to anything before or after it. He did not kiss her that evening. He was, she had come to understand, a man who moved at the pace of something considered, and she did not want to rush a single careful inch of it. He walked her to Mrs. Paulson's house through the cold February night, and at the gate he held her hand again briefly and looked at her with an expression that was full of things he had not yet learned to say, and said good night. She went inside and sat in her room for a long time in the dark. March arrived, and with it the first warmth, the kind that comes early and tentative to West Texas. A few days of 60-degree air that smell like grass starting and dirt opening up. The cattle operation at Double Bar began to pick up with the season, and Jasper's schedule grew tighter, but he did not miss a single evening session. What had shifted between them was quiet but unmistakable, at least to the two of them. In a town of Dusty Creek's size and close observation, it was unmistakable to others as well. Mrs. Paulson, who was kind and had seen a great deal of life, said nothing directly but began to ensure there was always coffee and something to eat if Maria came home later than expected. Bess Alderman, who was observant and warm, looked between them at a Thursday session one evening with an expression that was entirely knowing and entirely supportive. The less kind observations came, as Maria had known they would, from Harlan Pope at the general store, who made a remark about schoolteachers and cowboys to the Reverend within earshot of Bess Alderman, who reported it back to Maria with indignation on her behalf. Maria thanked Bess and noted that Mr. Pope's opinions were his to have and hers to disregard, which she did with perfect composure. Reverend Crane, for his part, spoke to Maria after a Sunday service in March and expressed, with what he apparently considered delicacy, that a proper courtship required certain standards of public conduct. Maria said she agreed entirely that she and Mr. Rourke had conducted themselves with complete propriety, and that she hoped the Reverend would feel comfortable coming to any of her evening sessions to see the work being done there, which she offered with such guileless sincerity that Crane found himself agreeing before he had fully decided whether he wanted to. He came the following Tuesday and was, by the end of the session, clearly impressed by the quality of the teaching and the evident progress of the students. He shook Jasper's hand on the way out and said that education was a gift from God and that it was never too late to receive it, and Jasper said, "No, sir, I've found that to be true," and looked at Maria briefly from the corner of his eye with that not-quite smile. Spring moved through April and into May. Jasper had by now moved through the McGuffey's second reader and had begun a third-level primer Maria had sent away for to San Antonio. He was writing his own sentences now, not copying but composing, rough and direct in style, but grammatically sound and full of a precision that was entirely characteristic of the way he spoke and thought. She had begun to feel, reading the things he wrote for practice, that she was being allowed into a room of a house that most people never got to enter. One evening he wrote, as a practice composition she had assigned on the theme of something the student valued, a paragraph about the land west of the Pecos River at dawn, and it was so good, so genuinely and precisely writ, with none of the flatness that sometimes came from a person applying correct grammar to a subject they did not feel, that she read it twice and then looked up at him. "Did you write this yourself?" she said. "No copying." "From my own head," he said, watching her. "Jasper," she said, "this is very, very good." He looked at her with the expression she associated with good things arriving before he had quite braced for them. "It's just a paragraph," he said. "It's your paragraph," she said. "In your words, about something you love, that's what writing is for." He was quiet for a moment. "I never thought I'd say something like that and have it be," he searched for the word. "Permanent," he said at last. "Written things stay, spoken things you never know." She understood exactly what he meant, and the understanding was so complete and immediate that she felt it in her hands, which was where she felt things that mattered to her. "Keep it," she said, sliding the paper back to him. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket with the same care he had used for the first paper with his name on it, and she thought about all the papers he was keeping over there, against his chest, and she loved him. She knew it in that moment cleanly and entirely, without dramatic revelation or hesitation. She simply knew it the way you know a road you've been on long enough. She did not say it. Not yet. It wasn't the moment. The spring drive at the Double Bar Ranch began in earnest in the middle of May, and Jasper was gone for 3 weeks with the cattle north toward the Concho River country. He told her before he left, standing at the school door in the evening with his hat in his hand, that he would be back by the 1st of June. "I know," she said. "The cattle don't move themselves." "I'll practice while I'm out," he said. "I know that too," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the full weight of what was between them visible in his expression, and then he said, "I'll be back," and she said, "I know," and he left, and the town was slightly diminished for the duration. She kept her children's sessions and her evening adult sessions, and she was fine. She was always fine. She wrote letters and she read and she worked on her lesson materials, and she was perfectly all right. She just also counted the days, which was a separate matter. He returned on the 28th of May, 3 days before he had said, and she was alone at the school erasing the board from the afternoon session when the door opened, and he came in, trail dusty and sundark from 3 weeks of open sky, and she turned and saw him, and the honest truth of how relieved she was to see him crossed her face before she could moderate it. He crossed the room in 2 or 3 strides, and she met him at the center of it, and he stopped close, closer than he had been before, and he said, "I brought you something," and held out a piece of folded paper, and she took it and opened it. It was a letter. 3 full paragraphs in his handwriting, which had grown stronger and clearer over the weeks he'd been away, evidently practicing precisely as he'd said he would. She read it. It was a letter about the land on the drive, the sky and the distances, the smell of cattle and wood smoke and river water, the way the stars were thick as thrown grain out away from any town. And at the end it said, in his direct and careful way, that he had thought about her every day and that there were things he intended to say when he came back, and he was asking her in advance if she was willing to hear them. She looked up from the letter. He was watching her with that full, guarded attention. "I wrote that myself," he said. "No help." "I know," she said. She could see it in the style of it, completely his. "It's a beautiful letter. I'm not a man who knows many pretty words," he said, "but I know what's true and I know how to say what I mean, at least in writing now, so that's what I did." "Jasper," she said, "I want to court you properly," he said. "If you'll allow it, I want to call on you at Mrs. Paulson's and take you walking on Sundays and do things the right way. I don't have land yet and I don't have a house, but I have savings and I have a plan and I will have those things." He paused. "And what I feel for you isn't something I've ever felt for anyone else, and I'm not able to keep pretending I'm just a student coming to evening sessions for the betterment of my professional skills." She laughed. It came out warm and genuine, and the sound of it in the quiet room seemed to surprise him pleasantly. "Professional skills," she said. "I was trying to be correct about it," he said, and there was something in his voice that was lighter than usual, the way a person sounds when they have finally said the thing they were carrying. She stepped forward and she put her hand flat against his chest, against the place where she knew he kept his folded papers, and she said, "Yes, Jasper. Court me properly. I would like that very much." He covered her hand with his, the same way he had in February, and he breathed out slowly, as though he had been holding the breath for quite some time. He kissed her then, softly and with no uncertainty at all, and it was the most certain thing that had happened in Dusty Creek, Texas, in a good long while. June unfolded warmly and with a sweetness that Maria recognized as happiness in its straightforward form. Jasper called at Mrs. Paulson's on Sunday afternoons, properly, and Mrs. Paulson received him with a warmth that told Maria she approved, and they walked along the creek where the cottonwoods were putting out their first summer shade, and talked in the easy way of people who have already done the harder work of knowing each other. He told her on one of those walks, been making inquiries about land. There was a section of ground south of Dusty Creek along a tributary of the Pecos that was available under the homestead provisions, and a man at the land office in San Angelo had confirmed the legality of the claim. It was enough ground for a small cattle operation, not large but workable. "Could you read the documents yourself?" she asked. "Most of them," he said. "The ones from the land office had some words I had to look up." He said it without any particular shame, which she noted and liked. A man who could admit to needing a dictionary was a man who was interested in the truth of the thing rather than the appearance of knowing it. "That's what dictionaries are for," she said. "There's one at the general store," he said. "I've been using it regular now. Pope doesn't like it much." "Pope doesn't like much," she said, which was perhaps not entirely charitable but was accurate. Jasper looked at her sideways with that expression, and she smiled without intending to and didn't try to take it back. He had saved more than she had realized. The years of cattle work, with the careful economy of a man who lived in a bunkhouse and had no particular expenses, had accumulated into something meaningful. He showed her his accounts, which he had begun keeping himself now in a small ledger he had bought at the general store, each entry in his own handwriting, neat and precise in the way his mind was, and she looked at the figures and understood that he had built something real out of the discipline of his life, and she felt a pride in him that was also, she recognized, a kind of love. By August he had filed the land claim. The evening sessions continued through the summer and into fall. Eli Vargas was reading the San Antonio newspaper with only occasional help. Bess Alderman could keep her household accounts independently and had begun reading for pleasure, a novel she had ordered from the catalog that she described as scandalous and entertaining in equal measure. Ruby from the saloon had progressed so far that Maria had quietly begun lending her books of genuine difficulty, and Ruby consumed them with a ferocity that was something to see. Jasper, by September, was reading newspapers himself. He read them thoroughly and thought about what he read and brought the thinking into conversation with Maria, and she found these conversations among the most stimulating she'd had since leaving Austin. His mind, unencumbered by years of formal education's tendency to narrow thinking into approved channels, moved across ideas with a freedom that was genuinely original. The land was his on paper. The cabin would have to come. He began planning it, and she watched him plan it, and it was the most real and grounded thing she had ever watched a person do. A man laying out the shape of his future in practical terms that were also, in their way, an act of hope. He asked her to marry him in October, exactly 1 year after she had stepped off the stage at Dusty Creek. He did it the right way, which for Jasper meant he had asked Mrs. Paulson if he could have a private word with Maria in the sitting room, and Mrs. Paulson had said yes, and found a reason to be extensively occupied in the kitchen. And he sat across from Maria with his hat on his knee, and he said what he had to say in full sentences without abridging any of it. He said that he had come to her school with nothing, without even the ability to write his own name, and that she had given him something that changed the entire shape of what his life could be, and that he understood those were two separate things, the gratitude and the love, and he wanted to be clear that what he felt for her was not gratitude dressed up as something else but was love, plainly and specifically, for the particular person she was. "I've spent a year," he said, "learning to put things into words. So let me use them correctly now. I love you, Maria. I'd like to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me. On the land I've claimed south of town, which will be a working ranch and not much else for a while, and in a house I'll build with my own hands, and in a life that will have everything I want in it, which is work I understand and land that's mine and you beside me." She had known the question was coming. She was not the kind of woman who was surprised by things she had already reasoned through completely. But hearing it, in his voice, in the sitting room with the October light through the window and Mrs. Paulson's excellent pretense of not listening just barely audible from the kitchen, she felt it as something new anyway, the way a conclusion you've already reached can still arrive with force. "Yes," she said. "Jasper, yes." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat, the same pocket where he kept his papers, and he took out a ring. It was a simple thing, silver with a small turquoise stone, bought from a trader who passed through San Angelo, and it was exactly what it was, honest and not excessive and chosen with care. He put it on her hand and held her hand between both of his, and the firmness and the warmth of his hold was something she wanted to be inside of for a long time. Mrs. Paulson appeared from the kitchen with suspicious speed, and a piece of pie that she had clearly prepared in advance, and she cried a little and said they were well suited, and that she had known from the first time Jasper lit the school stove at 5 in the morning that he was a man worth knowing. They were married in November, in the church that had been her schoolroom, by Reverend Crane, who had by this point come around entirely on the subject of the schoolteacher and the cowboy, and performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. The whole town came, or near enough. Bess Alderman sat in the front with her husband, who was a taciturn man but who had shaken Jasper's hand firmly beforehand. Eli Vargas wore his best jacket. Corrine, who was now 13 and reading at a level that had made Maria write to Mrs. Caulfield in great excitement, sat with her mother and cried in the open, unself-conscious way of young people who feel things with their whole selves. Even Ruby came, slipping into the back pew in a respectable dress that nobody commented on. Cal Hutchins attended and shook both their hands after, and said he supposed he could manage losing a good hand if he got to attend the wedding, which was the closest thing to a joke Maria had heard him attempt. Jasper, standing at the front of the church in the clean clothes he had bought for the occasion, was the most serious she had ever seen him and the most at ease simultaneously. He said his vows in a clear, deliberate voice, with the full weight of intention behind each word, and she said hers back to him with her eyes on his the whole time. After the service, when the gathering had moved into the fresh November air and Bess had organized some sort of informal celebration with food that various women of the town had contributed, Maria stood near Jasper in the pale sunshine, and someone had provided a simple fiddle player, and there was music and voices, and she was aware of being entirely, uncomplicatedly happy in a way that felt both earned and given. He bent down and said quietly near her ear, "I wrote something last night. I'll give it to you later." "What is it?" she said. "I don't want to say out loud," he said. "It's private." That evening, in the house they had temporarily taken from Mrs. Paulson's cousin who was away until spring, he gave her a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, 2 pages this time, and it was in his handwriting that was now strong and formed and entirely itself, with his particular way of spacing the words that she had watched develop over the year, and that she found she could not have mistaken for anyone else's writing. She read it in the lamplight while he watched from across the room with that particular still attention. It was the most honest thing she had ever read. He wrote about being 9 years old on a cattle drive and not being able to read the signs on the trail, and about the particular shame of that, the way it compounded over years into something he had stopped examining directly. He wrote about the day he had walked into her classroom and nearly walked back out. He wrote about the J on the slate. He wrote about the night he had written his name for the first time and folded the paper and put it in his pocket. And he wrote about what it had meant, which was that he had existed in a way that could be seen, that had been made real and permanent on a surface that would not disappear when someone stopped listening. He wrote that she had given him that, and that it was the greatest thing anyone had ever given him, and that he would not forget it for the length of his life. Then he wrote, on the second page, about the morning she had turned around in the school with chalk on her hands, and he had thought, before he had any right to think it, that she was the most extraordinary person he had ever seen standing still. She looked up from the letter. The lamp was between them and the light was warm, and she said his name, and he crossed the room and she stood, and he put his arms around her, and she held him, and neither of them said anything else that evening, because there was nothing left to say that they hadn't already said in every way available to them. The cabin on the land south of Dusty Creek took the winter and into the spring to build. Jasper worked on it with 2 men he hired from town who were skilled at timber work, and on Saturdays when the school was not in session, Maria came out and watched the thing rise from the ground, and she had opinions about the placement of the windows which Jasper received with complete seriousness and incorporated into the construction without condescension, which was, she thought, a quality more valuable than any amount of building skill. She kept the school. She had not intended to give it up, and Jasper had never suggested she should. The question of what she would do, in fact, had not even needed to be asked, because he understood, as he had understood from the beginning, that her work was who she was and not a temporary condition waiting to be resolved by marriage. He had watched her teach for a year. He knew what it cost her and what it gave her and what it meant, and he would not have considered suggesting she lay it down any more than he would have stopped riding cattle. The town's opinion on this arrangement was divided, as towns' opinions tended to be. Several women thought it strange, and Harlan Pope made another remark that Bess Alderman told Maria about with righteous indignation. Reverend Crane, to his genuine credit, said from his pulpit that the good Lord had made each person with a purpose, and that a woman called to teaching was answering her purpose with the same dignity as a man called to any other work. Maria heard this secondhand from Mrs. Paulson and thought considerably better of Reverend Crane from that point forward. They moved into the cabin in April of 1880. It was not large, but it was well built, with 2 proper windows in the main room, and a small separate room she could use as a study where she kept her books and prepared her lessons. Jasper built her a desk, working in the evenings, and it was a good desk, solid and exactly the right height, and when he brought it in and set it in the study, and she sat at it for the first time. She ran her hands along the surface and looked at him, and he stood in the doorway of the little room with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has done something right. Spring calving kept him busy through May, and Maria had a new cohort of students for the school year, including 3 children from families who had recently settled the surrounding area as the country slowly filled in. The evening sessions continued. Eli Vargas had, by this point, become such a capable reader that he was helping newer students with their English, and Maria sometimes let him lead a portion of the session, which he did with enormous dignity and considerable competence. By summer of 1880, Maria knew she was expecting a child, and she told Jasper on a warm July evening when they were sitting on the small porch of their cabin watching the light go out of the sky to the west, the Pecos country going from gold to red to purple in that extravagant way it had in summer, and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, very quietly, "Really? Really?" she said. He was quiet for a little longer, and she watched his profile in the fading light. He had the look of a man processing something enormous through a filter that was still calibrating its size. "All right," he said at last. "All right," she said, amused. He turned and looked at her with a helplessness that was entirely unlike him and entirely endearing. "I don't know how to say what I feel right now," he said. "Then write it," she said. He did. That night, after she was asleep, she woke briefly and saw the lamp burning low in the study and the shadow of him at the desk, and she listened to the quiet scratch of his writing and fell back asleep in the warmth of knowing exactly where he was. He gave her the pages in the morning. She read them over breakfast. He had written in his full and honest style what he had felt sitting on the porch and what he felt now, and what he hoped the child would know, and what he intended to give it that he had never had himself, a home in one place, a name written down, a person who would show it how to read its own letters. The last line of the pages said, "I will teach this child everything I know, and everything you taught me, and I will tell them where it came from." She set the pages down and looked across the table at him, and he looked back, and they were very still for a moment in the morning light of their own house. "That's a good thing," she said, the same words he had used about her father all those months ago in the church at dawn. "Yes," he said, "it is." The baby was born in February of 1881 in the cabin during a night that was cold and clear and full of stars. Mrs. Paulson came out to help, and a woman named Clara from the neighboring ranch who had experience with births, and Jasper paced the main room for what he later said was either 5 hours or 5 years. He was not sure which, until the sound he had been waiting for arrived from the other room, and he went very still and then sat down on the bench near the wall. Mrs. Paulson brought the child out and put it in his arms. It was a boy. Large and red-faced and furious about the world in the way of new arrivals, Jasper held him with the careful solidity of a man accustomed to large animals, which turned out to be genuinely useful, and looked at him for a long time. "He's loud," he said. "He has opinions," said Mrs. Paulson. They named him Thomas William Rourke. Thomas, for the name Jasper had once heard an older man on a drive say, meant twin in some old language, which had appealed to him for reasons he said he couldn't fully explain, and William for Maria's father, which made her cry in the easy way of new mothers, which she had not expected to be and turned out to be entirely. Jasper held Thomas William in the morning after everything had settled, and Mrs. Paulson and Clara had gone home to rest, and Maria was sleeping, and the cabin was quiet and very still. He held his son in the early light from the east-facing window, and the light fell across them both, and he talked to the baby in a low voice, practical and calm, about the land and the sky and the cattle, and about a woman who had shown him that words were his too, that the written world belonged to him as much as to anyone, and that this boy would never, not one day of his life, have to walk into a room unable to read a single word on the wall. Dusty Creek in 1880 was changing in the way that all such places changed, slowly and with resistance, but with inevitability. New families were arriving. The railroad had reached a town 30 miles south, and the movement of goods and people was accelerating in ways that were reshaping the whole character of the country. Maria had by now been teaching in the school for 3 years and had watched her students move through, and some of them move on. The older children going out into the world with the ability to read and write and figure, which she counted as her work done and done well. The Double Bar Ranch had expanded, which meant Cal Hutchins needed more hands and also, increasingly, needed someone who could read correspondence and contracts. He hired a man for the purpose, which was the standard solution. But more than once, when there was a question about a document and Jasper was in the vicinity, Hutchins took the document to Jasper first, and Jasper read it and said what it said in plain terms, and Hutchins listened, and then Hutchins went to the hired man. It was a small thing, but it was consistent, and Maria knew about it and considered it a specific satisfaction. The cattle operation on the South Land was growing. Jasper had purchased his initial small herd with the savings, added calves through the spring of 1880, added more through 1881. He still worked periodically for the Double Bar in the busy seasons, because the income was practical, and because he liked the work and the men. But the balance was shifting toward his own land, and he could see the shape of a time when he would not need the wages from anyone else. Thomas William at 8 months was a person with strong views about sitting up, which he accomplished at an age that made Mrs. Paulson say she had never seen such a thing. Maria held him in the evenings sometimes while she was reading and looked at his wide, serious eyes and read to him aloud, which was not at all the sort of thing an 8-month-old could follow, but it was never too early in her professional and personal opinion. Jasper came home one October evening from a day on the South Range with the particular look he wore when something had happened worth discussing, and he said, over supper, that he had met a man named Avery who was looking to sell a section of adjoining land, and that the price was reasonable and the land was water accessible, which was the critical thing in this country, and he had been thinking. Maria listened, feeding Thomas William pieces of soft bread at the table beside her. "I've been thinking too," she said when he had laid out the particulars. "About the land," he said. "About the school," she said. "The enrollment is up. There are children coming from 3 settlements east of here who are riding too far. I've written to the county about the possibility of a second school closer to them. If they approve funding, they'll need a teacher." He thought about this. Thomas William grabbed a fistful of his father's sleeve, and Jasper glanced at him and then back at Maria. "You'd recommend someone," he said. "I'd recommend Ruby," she said. He looked at her with the expression of genuine surprise that came to his face so rarely and was so complete when it arrived. "Ruby," he said. "She reads now at a level most grown adults in this county don't," Maria said. "She has a mind for teaching. She's patient and she understands things from the perspective of someone who had to work for every piece of knowledge she got. She'd be extraordinary." "She'd have to leave the saloon," he said. "I know," said Maria. "She knows. I've spoken to her. She wants to. She just needs the position and someone to say out loud that she's capable." Jasper was quiet for a moment and then said, "All right. What do you need from me?" "Nothing," she said. "I can write the letters myself. I just wanted you to know." He looked at her across the supper table in the lamplight of their own kitchen with their son between them, and the look was the full, complete one that she had come to know as what happiness looked like on his particular face, settled and warm and without reservation. "You're going to change this whole county," he said, "aren't you?" "I intend to make a reasonable effort," she said. Ruby's appointment to the proposed Eastern school took 6 months of correspondence with the county, during which time Maria wrote 4 letters and received 3 responses, and attended 1 meeting in San Angelo with Thomas William on her hip, which she suspected did her cause no harm in terms of the impression of settled respectability. The funding was approved in the spring of 1882, and Ruby took up the position in September of that year, and within 6 months had an enrollment of 22 children, which was more than Maria's school had begun with. Maria wrote to Mrs. Caulfield in Austin with the news. Mrs. Caulfield wrote back a letter that occupied 3 full pages and ended with the declaration that Maria Garrison had done better work in the West Texas country than any 10 men sent in the same direction could have done, and that she had always known it would be so. Maria showed the letter to Jasper, who read it in full, which he could do now with ease, scanning each line at a comfortable speed that still gave her a quiet pleasure every time she observed it. He handed it back when he was done. "She's right," he said. "She has strong opinions," said Maria. "She's still right," he said. Thomas William turned 2 in February of 1883 and was, as his father had suggested he might be, loud and opinionated and absorbed in the world with a comprehensive interest that Maria found both exhausting and exactly right. He had words. He had many words, in fact, and used them constantly, and Jasper received this development with an expression of mingled pride and resignation. One afternoon Maria was reading aloud from a picture book she had ordered from Austin, sitting with Thomas on her lap in the big chair by the window, the good afternoon light coming in from the south, and Jasper came in from the yard and stood in the doorway watching. She looked up. "You look like your father," she told Thomas, "watching from doorways." Jasper came in and sat on the edge of the chair beside her, which required some negotiation of space but was managed, and Thomas William, who had strong opinions about his father's presence, immediately abandoned the picture book in favor of climbing. Jasper received the climbing with the patience of a man who has decided that certain things are simply part of the terrain. "Come here," Maria said, and she handed Jasper the picture book. "Read to him." He took it with one hand, the other occupied with steadying Thomas on his knee, and he opened it to the first page, and he read. His voice was low and steady, and the words came out clear and sure, and Thomas William tilted his head in that way he had when something caught his interest, and looked at the page. Maria watched them, the man and the boy in the afternoon light, the book open between them, the voice moving through the simple words of the story with an ease that had been hard-won over 2 years of lamplight and chalk and folded papers in a breast pocket. She thought about the morning he had walked into her school with nothing but the courage to ask, about the J on the slate, about his name, written in a wavering line on a piece of paper he had folded and kept against his heart, about every letter they had built together, one careful stroke at a time, from nothing into something real. She thought about what he had written in the letter he gave her on their wedding night, the last line, "I will tell them where it came from." He was telling Thomas now, not with the words of it but with the fact of it, reading in his own voice in his own house from a book. That was where it came from. In the summer of 1883, Maria found she was expecting again, and told Jasper in the same quiet way she had the first time, on the porch in the evening. He was not quiet this time in the same way. He took a long breath and then he pulled her against his side, right there on the porch bench, and held her there, and she could feel the steadiness of him against her shoulder. "All right," she said, because it was his word for things that were larger than language. "All right," he agreed, and she laughed and he pressed his lips to the top of her head. The second child was born in February of 1884, also in the cabin, though the cabin had been extended now with a proper back room and a real stone hearth that Jasper and Eli Vargas had built over the course of a summer. It was a girl this time, and she came into the world with the same strong opinions as her brother, and they named her Clara Maria Rourke, Clara for the woman who had helped at Thomas's birth, and me for no particular reason, except that Jasper said it sounded like itself when you put it after Clara, and Maria said that was as good a reason as any. Thomas William, 3 years old and proprietorial about his place in the family order, looked at Clara me for a long time when Jasper brought him in to meet her, and then put his hand very gently on her head with the careful solemnity of a child who has decided to take something seriously, and that was that. Eli Vargas came by the ranch one morning that spring to return a book Maria had lent him and to meet the new baby, and he held Clara Mee with the careful delight of a man who had grandchildren of his own far away, and said she had good eyes, which was his highest compliment. He had, by this point, been reading for 3 years, and had consumed everything Maria could put in front of him with a thoroughness that she thought would have made Mrs. Caulfield sentimental. He had written a letter the previous year to a son he had not contacted in some years, and he had written it himself, and he told Maria about it at one of the last formal evening sessions he attended before the sessions wound down as the adult students reached a sustainable independence. "Did he write back?" Maria had asked. "He did," said Eli. "It took 4 months, but he wrote back." Maria had thought about that for a long time afterward, about the letters that crossed distances, about words on paper persisting when voices couldn't reach. The ranch was solid by 1885. Jasper had bought the adjoining section from Avery, and the combined land was working efficiently with a small but growing herd. He had hired one hand, a young man named Dell who was 17 when he arrived, and who spent his first evening meals at their table looking at the books on Maria's shelves, with the particular expression she recognized from the beginning of things. She taught Dell on evenings when there was time, and Jasper sometimes sat with them at the table, not because he needed the teaching but because he said he liked the reminder of where he had started, and occasionally because Dell had questions that Jasper, with 4 years of reading behind him, could answer from experience in a way that was useful. Watching them at the table, the older man and the younger, the book spread between them, Maria felt something that she had no better word for than continuance. "The thing that goes forward, Mrs. Caulfield had said once that a teacher's real work was invisible because it happened inside other people and then went on without you, and Maria had understood it then in the abstract and understood it now in the particular. In the autumn of 1885, Jasper came in from the South Range one afternoon and found Maria at her desk in the study, writing, Thomas William asleep in the next room, and Clara Mee in the small crib near the door. He stood in the doorway of the study in that particular way of his, and she looked up. "Something on your mind," she said. It was not a question. He came in and sat on the edge of the desk in a way he sometimes did when he wanted to be close and talk at the same time. He had a folded piece of paper in his hand, and he held it out to her. She took it and unfolded it. It was a letter not to her but from a land agent in San Angelo, and it was an offer to purchase the south section at a significant sum from a company that was consolidating range land in the area. She read it through and looked up. "What do you want to do?" she said. "Keep the land," he said, "but I wanted to read it with you, make sure I understood it right." She looked at the letter again. "You understood it right," she said. "They're offering a fair price, but they'd want the water access that comes with the south pasture, and without that the north section doesn't work the same way." "That's what I thought," he said. He took the letter back. He had not needed her to tell him. He had needed to confirm that what he understood was what was actually written, the old practice of checking the reading against a trusted second reader. She recognized the habit and found it, as she found almost everything he did, entirely reasonable. "Write them back yourself," she said. "Tell them the land is not for sale." He wrote the letter that evening at her desk, while she put the children to bed, and she heard the scratch of the pen from the hallway and did not go in, because it was his letter and his land and his hand making the words, and she respected all of that in the full dimension of what it had taken to get there. 7 years since she had stepped off the stage in Dusty Creek with her carpetbag and her convictions. 7 years of school mornings and evening sessions and lamplight lessons, and folded papers and chalk on her hands. Thomas William was 4, Clara Mee was 1. The cabin had become a proper house. The South land was theirs and working, and Jasper Rourke could read a contract and write a letter and keep his own accounts and read stories to his children in the evenings, and none of it had been given to him. He had learned it and built it and kept it, and she had shown him the door. On an October evening, the anniversary of the first time he had walked into her school, she found a folded piece of paper on her desk in the study. He had put it there when she was out at the barn checking on a cow that had gone off her feed, and it was a letter, as she had come to know he would always, eventually, write her one when the thing was too large for speaking. She sat at her desk in the lamplight and read it. He had written about the 7 years. He had written about the day he had walked into her school with nothing, and how he had almost turned back at the door. He had written about the J on the slate, and about the first time he had written his full name, and how he had not been able to explain what it meant and still wasn't sure he fully could, except that it had meant he was real in a way he had not been before, that he existed on paper in his own hand, that the world had a record of him that he had made himself. He wrote that he had been thinking about the piece of paper in his breast pocket, the first one, the one with Jasper written in that wavering line, and that he had kept it all this time. He had taken it out that morning, he wrote, and unfolded it and held it and thought about all the distance between that line of letters and where he was now. He wrote that all of it, every word he had ever read and every sentence he had ever written, and every account he had kept and every letter he had sent, had started in her classroom on a Thursday evening in October with a piece of chalk and a slate and a woman who had said, without any pity, without any condescension, "This is J. It is the first letter of your name." He wrote that he would not forget what she had given him for as long as he lived, and that he loved her with the full weight of everything he had become, and that he could not imagine what shape his life would have had without her in it, and that he did not intend to have to. The last line of the letter read, "I am still learning. I will keep learning. You showed me that it never ends, and it doesn't, and I'm glad of it." Maria set the letter on the desk and looked at the lamp flame for a moment, the way it moved, small and steady and sure. She got up from the desk and went through the house, past the children's room where Thomas, William, and Clara Me were sleeping, the boy with the confident sprawl of a child who has never doubted his claim on the space around him, the girl tucked into herself and small and complete, and she went out the back door of the house into the October night. And Jasper was there, sitting on the porch step looking at the sky, which was thick with stars the way it always was out here away from the town. And he heard her come out and looked up. She sat beside him on the step, and he put his arm around her, and she leaned against his shoulder, and they looked at the stars over the Pecos country together, the cold, clean air of October on their faces, and the light from the window behind them threw a warm square onto the porch boards, and from inside the house, the small sound of a sleeping child shifting could be heard, and the land south and east was theirs, and the sky was the same sky it had always been over this country. Unchanged and indifferent and magnificent. "I kept that paper," she said. He knew which one she meant. "I know," he said. "Your name on it," she said. "I kept my copy of it. The one I made to show you what it should look like. I kept it." He turned and looked at her. "I have it in my desk," she said. "I've had it since that first November." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he said. She looked up at him, at his face in the star-and-window light, at the man who had walked in from the morning and shaken her world into a better shape entirely, at the person whose life and hers had wound together so completely that she could not now imagine the thread of one without the other. "Because it was the beginning," she said, "and I knew it even then." He looked at her with all of it visible, the love that had nowhere left to hide after 7 years of shared mornings and evening sessions, and lamplight and children and land and letters. The love that was not the feeling of one particular moment, but the accumulated fact of all of them together. And he said, in the voice that had once spoken only of cattle and distances and practical things, and now held everything, "So did I." The Pecos wind moved through the October night, and the stars burned steady, and the house behind them was warm and theirs. And on Maria Rourke's desk in the study, 2 pieces of paper lay within arm's reach of each other. His name in her hand from a Thursday evening in the beginning of things, and his letter in his own from the evening just ended, and between them was the whole story of what had been made in the space between a teacher and her student, and a woman and a man, and a life assembled word by word, letter by letter, out of nothing and into everything.